One of the simple problems about anti-Semitism is, as everybody who knows about it knows, is that it's a shape-shifting virus. At one point in the history of Europe, in the history of our own country, the Jews were hated because they were poor, and then they were hated because they were rich. They were hated for not integrating, and then they were hated for integrating. In the era where you could hate people for their religion, they were hated for their religion. Then when that became impossible in Europe, you couldn't hate people for their religion, they were hated for their race. Then at a particular point in Europe, we discovered we couldn't hate people for their race anymore. So what did we hate people for if they were Jewish? We hated them for being stateless. Then the Jewish people got a state, and they were hated for having a state. Now, you cannot tell me in this situation that there's a coincidence here. It is not a coincidence that every way you do it, it ends up like that. And great figures, including somebody I've quoted a lot in recent days and weeks, Vasily Grossman, the great Russian novelist, the author of Life and Fate, among other works.
And everything flows.
He said everything comes from this. And of course, the great thing that Grossman said, at the heart of his great novel, in those few pages where he writes about anti-Semitism, about the dark heart of the 20th century, as he goes from Stalingrad to Treblinka, the great pages in which Grossman takes the time out to talk about anti-Semitism in the midnight of the 20th century. He says, of course, that he says some of what I've just said about anti-Semitism being a shape-shifting virus, because of course Hitler had it, as rather well known, but Stalin ended up with it as well. I mean, it goes every direction, everywhere. But as Grossman greatly says, the thing about it is that it tells you about the person who suffers from it, not about the Jews. He says, tell me what you accuse the Jews of, I'll tell you what you're guilty of. People who hate the Jews for being religious have religious problems themselves. People who hate the fact that Jews have a state that they're willing to defend have a problem with defending their own state themselves, and much, much more, on and on and on.